Mother's last moments were spent in terror, fighting for her life as someone she trusted brutally ended it. While she gasped for air, her killer looked into her eyes. Eyes that had once welcomed him into her home, served him dinner, treated him like family. Leslie Prior died at the hands of someone who had laughed at her kitchen table, someone her daughter had kissed goodnight, someone who knew exactly where she kept her spare key. Right now, as you watch this, there are killers living normal lives. They're picking up groceries, attending PTA meetings, posting family photos on social media. They sleep peacefully while their victims' families lie awake, haunted by unanswered questions. The most chilling truth about murder isn't that strangers kill. It's that the people closest to us can become our destroyers. Leslie Prior learned this the hardest way possible. On May 2, 2001, in her safe Chevy Chase neighborhood, someone who knew her intimately turned her own home into a death trap. She was strangled, her head battered repeatedly into the floor until her life drained away. But here's what will make your blood run cold. Her killer didn't just murder her and disappear. He stayed. He comforted her grieving daughter. He attended family gatherings. He looked Leslie's loved ones in the eye while they begged for answers, knowing he was the answer they desperately sought. For 23 excruciating years, this monster walked free. He built relationships, maybe even had his own family, all while Leslie's daughter grew up motherless, wondering who could have done such evil. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone her mother should have witnessed, he was there, watching the pain he created, feeding off the destruction he caused. The truth about Leslie's killer will destroy your sense of safety. It will make you question every person who has ever been close to your family. Because when investigators finally caught him, they didn't just solve a murder, they exposed how easily evil can masquerade as love. Don't let the resolution of Leslie Prior's cold case fade into silence. Subscribe now to uncover the shocking truth behind how justice was finally served. Ignore this, and you'll be turning your back on the hard-fought justice. Subscribe now, unless you're okay with letting the truth go unnoticed.
Never gave a sample of DNA.
That's correct. We obtained a sample from a discarded water bottle.
I don't know, I mean, I was in the house, but it was years before,
Correct.
When I dated her.
Correct.
I don't know. I wish I could tell you. I don't know. I don't understand. This is all very bewildering, very strange.
May 2, 2001 started like any other Tuesday for Leslie Prior. The 50-year-old mother had no idea she would never see another sunrise. While her neighbors prepared for their daily routines, Leslie was trapped in a nightmare that would end with her violent death. When she failed to show up for work that morning, a colleague who lived nearby decided to check on her. Nothing could have prepared them for the horror waiting inside Leslie's Chevy Chase home. Her body lay motionless, the life brutally squeezed from her by hands that had once touched her with apparent care. The killer didn't just murder Leslie, they destroyed her. She had been strangled with such force that her life slowly ebbed away as she fought desperately for each breath. But the strangulation wasn't enough to satisfy this monster's rage. In a final act of savage cruelty, her head was repeatedly smashed into the floor until her skull could take no more punishment. The impact was so violent, so relentless, that investigators knew this wasn't just murder. This was personal vengeance unleashed with terrifying fury. Blood evidence scattered throughout the scene told the story of Leslie's final moments. She had fought back, she had tried to survive, but her killer's rage was overwhelming, their determination to end her life absolute. The brutality was so extreme that seasoned detectives were shaken by the crime scene. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random attack. Someone had wanted Leslie Prior to suffer before they killed her. The most chilling detail? Her killer left behind more than just devastation. They left behind DNA evidence, traces of themselves embedded in the violence they had unleashed. Little did they know that this biological signature would eventually become their downfall. A silent witness that would speak from beyond the grave 23 years later. Can you wrap your mind around the fact that someone capable of such brutality was walking among Leslie's family and friends, comforting them in their grief, while knowing they were the source of all that pain? If that level of deception and cruelty doesn't make your skin crawl, hit that subscribe button to discover just how deep this betrayal goes. But the savage murder was just the beginning of this family's torment. The investigation was about to reveal something even more devastating than the crime itself. A truth so shocking it would redefine everything they thought they knew about trust, safety, and the people closest to them. The days that followed Leslie's murder brought a different kind of agony. While her killer walked free, her family was left to navigate a world where their mother, their anchor, had been ripped away by someone who remained faceless, nameless, and terrifyingly close. The Montgomery County Police arrived at Leslie's home expecting a routine welfare check. Instead, they walked into a crime scene that would haunt them for decades. As they secured the area and began collecting evidence, they had no idea they were about to embark on one of the longest, most frustrating investigations in the department's history. Detectives worked tirelessly in those first crucial months. They interviewed neighbors, analyzed the DNA evidence, and followed every lead that crossed their desks. The biological evidence was their strongest asset, clear, undeniable proof that the killer had been present during Leslie's final moments. They ran it through every database available, hoping for a match that would end the nightmare for Leslie's family. But the DNA belonged to a ghost, someone who had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted, never entered the system. Lauren Prior, Leslie's daughter, watched helplessly as months turned into years without answers. Every knock on the door brought false hope. Every phone call from detectives ended in disappointment. The teenager who had already lost her mother now faced the crushing reality that her killer might never be found. Birthdays passed without celebration. Holidays became reminders of an empty chair at the dinner table. Lauren grew from a grieving teenager into a young woman, then a mother herself, all while her mother's murderer remained free. The case files grew thicker with dead-end leads and false promises. Detectives retired, new ones took their place, but Leslie's murder remained unsolved. The DNA evidence sat in storage, a silent witness waiting for technology to catch up with justice. Years became decades, and hope began to feel like cruelty. Lauren's anguish deepened with each passing year. She couldn't move forward, couldn't find peace, couldn't even begin to heal because the person who destroyed her family was still out there, living, breathing, possibly hurting others. The uncertainty was torture. Worse than knowing might have been. At least knowledge brings closure. Uncertainty breeds endless consuming fear. 23 years of sleepless nights, 23 years of looking over shoulders, wondering if every stranger could be the killer. 23 years of police updates that led nowhere. 23 years of a daughter growing up, having children of her own, all while her mother's murderer walked free, untouchable, protected by time and the limitations of 2001 forensic technology. For 23 years, no answers. Just pain and suffering multiplying with each anniversary of Leslie's death. Try putting yourself in Lauren's shoes, watching your mother's killer escape justice year after year. Wouldn't you want that monster caught, no matter how long it took? But just when it seemed like this case would never be solved, something groundbreaking happened. In September 2022, Hope arrived in the form of cutting-edge science that would finally give Leslie's DNA the voice it had been waiting decades to use. September 2022 marked the beginning of the end for Leslie Preer's killer. After 21 years of silence, her blood evidence was about to find its voice through a revolutionary forensic technique that didn't even exist when she was murdered. Forensic genetic genealogy, the same technology that catches serial killers and identifies decades-old remains, was about to drag Leslie's murderer out of the shadows, where they had hidden for over 2 decades. Unlike traditional DNA testing that only works with exact matches in criminal databases, genetic genealogy casts a much wider net. It takes the killer's DNA and searches through millions of family trees, looking for distant relatives who have submitted their genetic information to ancestry websites. These innocent relatives, trying to trace their family histories, unknowingly become the keys to solving brutal murders they never even knew about. The process is painstaking and brilliant. Scientists build family trees backward through generations, following genetic breadcrumbs from third cousins to second cousins, from great-aunts to grandparents, slowly closing in on the source. Each connection brings them closer to identifying the person whose DNA was left behind in Leslie's blood. It's like genetic detective work on a massive scale, using the killer's own family against them. For months, genealogists worked methodically through the family connections, eliminating possibilities and narrowing down suspects. They didn't know they were hunting someone who had been hiding in plain sight, someone who had watched Leslie's family suffer while carrying the secret of what he had done. The DNA was leading them toward a revelation so shocking it would redefine everything about this case. The breakthrough came like lightning. The genetic analysis pointed to a family, then to a branch of that family, then to an individual who had a connection to Leslie that made investigators' blood run cold. This wasn't some random stranger who had broken into her home. This wasn't a drifter passing through town. The DNA belonged to someone who had been part of Leslie's world, someone who had access to her life, her home, her trust. When detectives saw the name the genealogy had produced, they couldn't believe it. The killer had been right there all along, woven into the fabric of the victim's family life. He had probably comforted Lauren during her darkest moments, attended family gatherings, maybe even helped search for Leslie's killer while knowing he was the monster everyone was looking for. The technology that finally gave Leslie justice had been waiting in laboratories for over 2 decades, but it needed to evolve, to become sophisticated enough to catch killers who thought time had made them untouchable. They were wrong. How is it possible that it took decades for science to catch up with justice? When you think about how many other cold cases are sitting in evidence rooms right now, waiting for this same breakthrough to give victims their voice back, it's both hopeful and heartbreaking. But who could have been close enough to Leslie to make this discovery so devastatingly personal? You won't believe it when you find out. With this earth-shattering revelation, detectives began to zero in on a suspect whose connection to Leslie would destroy any remaining sense of safety her family had left. Eugene Gligor. Eugene Gligor had been living a lie for 23 years. The man who once dated Leslie's daughter Lauren when they were both 15 had graduated from high school, built a career, and created what appeared to be a normal adult life. But underneath that carefully constructed facade was the brutal truth. He was a killer who had been hiding among the very people he had destroyed. In June 2024, detectives needed to confirm what the genetic genealogy had revealed. They had to obtain Gligor's DNA directly and compare it to the evidence from Leslie's crime scene. The 44-year-old had no idea that decades of scientific advancement were about to expose the monster he had kept buried since he was a teenager. When investigators collected Gligor's DNA sample, they weren't hoping for a match. They were expecting one. The genetic genealogy had already pointed them in his direction with devastating accuracy. But seeing the laboratory results still sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The DNA was a perfect match. Eugene Gligor's genetic material was embedded in Leslie Prier's blood. Physical proof that he had been there during her final, terrifying moment. The evidence was undeniable. The boy who had once sat at Leslie's dinner table, who had kissed her daughter goodnight, who had been welcomed into their family home, had returned to that same house to commit one of the most brutal murders in Montgomery County history. He had looked Leslie in the eyes as he strangled the life from her body, then battered her head into the floor until she could fight no more. On June 18, 2024, the U.S. Marshals Task Force surrounded Gligor in Washington, D.C. After 23 years of freedom, 23 years of living while Leslie lay dead, 23 years of watching her family suffer while he kept his deadly secret, Eugene Gligor was finally in handcuffs. The arrest that should have happened in 2001 was finally taking place in 2024. Lauren Prier had unknowingly dated her mother's future killer. She had trusted him, cared for him, brought him into her family's most intimate moments. The revelation didn't just solve her mother's murder, it shattered every memory she had of their relationship, poisoning every moment of teenage innocence with the knowledge that she had been in love with a monster. Can you wrap your mind around discovering that someone who was once a part of your life, someone you trusted completely, is now accused of murdering your mother? This became Lauren's devastating reality. A betrayal so deep it redefined every relationship she had ever trusted. But the real shocker came when detectives confronted Gligor with the evidence that had finally caught him. How would a killer react when 23 years of lies came crashing down? The police interrogation would provide answers that were somehow even more disturbing than the crime itself. The interrogation room became Eugene Gligor's final stage of deception. When detectives confronted him with the DNA evidence that had shattered his 23-year cover-up, his response was as chilling as his crime. He claimed he had no memory of the day Leslie died, no recollection of how his DNA ended up at a brutal murder scene. The detectives noted something that would haunt everyone who watched the footage. Gligor attempted to cry, but no tears came. Even in his moment of exposure, he couldn't summon genuine emotion. His lies crumbled under the weight of scientific evidence. There was no explaining away his genetic signature embedded in Leslie's blood. No story could account for his presence during her final moments. Faced with irrefutable proof, Gligor made a calculated decision that would rob Leslie's family of the full truth they deserved. Instead of fighting the charges and risking a first-degree murder conviction that could have meant life in prison, Gligor accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, a strategic move that capped his potential sentence at 30 years and avoided the public trial that would have exposed every horrific detail of what he did to Leslie. The plea deal meant Lauren would never hear her mother's killer explain why he murdered the woman who had welcomed him into their home. She would never get answers about whether this was planned or spontaneous, whether Leslie knew her killer was coming, or what her final words might have been. The plea silenced those questions forever. Lauren's reaction to the guilty plea was devastating. "He killed my mom and it's terrifying," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of 23 years of pain finally finding its target. She had watched portions of the interrogation video, seeing the man she had once trusted attempt to lie his way out of murdering her mother. The fact that he's trying to say he didn't know what was happening, or, "I don't remember, I'm not okay with that, I know he's lying." The guilty plea brought legal closure, but emotional healing remained elusive. How do you process the knowledge that someone you loved, someone you trusted with your teenage heart, had already committed the most heinous act possible against your family? How do you reconcile memories of shared laughter with the reality of brutal murder? After all these years of fighting for justice, The killer's confession wasn't enough to bring true closure to a daughter who had lost everything. How would you feel if you were forced to accept this hollow victory after decades of suffering? But there's one final twist to this story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about evil hiding among us. The story doesn't end with a plea deal. It ends with a revelation about how many other secrets might be buried in the people we trust most. Eugene Gligor's maximum sentence of 30 years feels both like victory and defeat for the Prieur family. After 23 years of wondering, searching, and suffering, they finally have answers. But those answers came with a price. The devastating knowledge that their tormentor had been hiding in plain sight, sharing their grief while secretly being its cause. Lauren Prieur now faces a reality more complex than she ever could have prepared for. Justice has been served, but it tastes bitter when mixed with betrayal. The teenage boy she once kissed goodnight had already committed the most unforgivable act against her family. Every memory of their relationship is now contaminated with the knowledge of what he had done. How do you heal from that level of deception? How do you ever trust again? The resolution of Leslie's case represents both hope and horror for families of cold case victims everywhere. Hope, because it proves that time doesn't protect killers forever. Science is catching up, and genetic genealogy is giving voices back to victims who have been silenced for decades. Horror, because it reveals how easily monsters can blend into our lives, how perfectly they can fake humanity while harboring the darkest secrets. Leslie's case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil. It doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as someone familiar, someone trusted, someone who sits at your dinner table and knows where you keep your spare key. The most dangerous predators are often the ones who never raise suspicion because they're already part of our world. For every Leslie Prieur who finally receives justice, there are thousands of other victims still waiting. Their evidence sits in storage rooms across the country. Their families age with unanswered questions. Their killers continue living free because they committed their crimes before science could catch them. But technology keeps advancing, databases keep growing, and cold cases keep getting solved. The long path to justice in Leslie's case wasn't just about finding her killer. It was about proving that time doesn't heal all wounds. That some questions demand answers no matter how many decades pass, and that families deserve closure, even when it comes disguised as devastating betrayal. If this case hasn't made you realize how precious justice is, how fragile our sense of safety really is, then maybe you should think about it again. Hit subscribe and let us know in the comments if you agree that no killer should ever feel safe from the reach of justice, no matter how much time passes. Share your thoughts below about how this case changed your perspective on trust and justice. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime cases that prove evil can never truly hide forever.